Okay. Hello and welcome to this special presentation from Story Into Screenplay. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gerald Hanks. I am the founder of Story Into Screenplay. The Story Into Screenplay offers script analysis and one-on-one consultations with clients in various stages of the screenwriting process. And today my guest is Matthew Kalil. Matthew is a writer, director, and script editor. He has written and co-written over 40 produced episodes of TV and has received numerous grants, development funding, and awards. Matt's productions have been screened and broadcast in the US, Canada, the UK, and numerous countries all around the world. He's also been teaching, writing, and mentoring students for close to 20 years. And today we're going to talk to Matt about his book, Three Wells of Screenwriting, Discover Your Deep Sources of Inspiration. First of all, Matt, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, and for those people who may not be familiar with your work, can you tell us how you got started as a screenwriter?
Sure. So I think, at school, I always wanted to tell stories. And one of my favorite memories from school is just telling the story of the taking of Pelham 1, 2, and 3, which was a movie, the original one. And people just gathered around and started listening. And I think I always wanted to do it. I just never thought I could. Never thought it was something that I would ever kind of end up doing. And then, at some point, I was just carrying on with my life, doing other things. At some point, I was working as a delivery person for a photographic accessories company. And I wrote a poem, came out of nowhere, and I was like, maybe I can be creative, maybe I can do this. And then I just tried my hand at screenwriting. I think I downloaded some scripts off the internet, read some books on screenwriting, and I wrote a couple of scripts and I submitted them to a competition. There was a national competition and one of them was finalized. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. And then I ended up going to a session, and I just remember going to a workshop, and there was the Christopher Vogler's book on story was there on the table as I arrived at the workshop. And I read that, and that was like, wow, okay, this is really interesting and it resonates. And from then on, I just kept writing, and I ended up doing a master's in the UK in screenwriting, and then went back to South Africa and been writing pretty much ever since, although writing is not as easy for me as it is, I think, for a lot of people. Well, people struggle with writing. That's kind of why I wrote the book, based on my own kind of struggles with getting unstuck to write. So I hope that answers your question about kind of what brought me into it from like way back to now. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I know you're originally from South Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and you're living in the US now. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And I think that one of the things that's great about your story is that you came from a lot of people who are even in the US who might not be in Hollywood directly,
Yes.
think that there are barriers to entry, that they can't make it.
Yes.
But you, obviously from pretty much the other side of the world,
Mm-hmm.
was able to break in and make it and get your stuff made.
Well, yeah, all of my stuff, I'm still yet to make a movie in the USA. So all my credits and everything I've done and written, as far as I know, is produced in South Africa, screened around the world, and some movies I've made have played in different places around the world. But I'm yet to make a movie in the USA, which I can't wait to do. I'm fresh. I've only arrived here about a month, 2 months ago. It's interesting. People forget about how international filmmaking is, and they think, okay, they've got to focus on the US market, and they've got to focus on LA, and they've got to focus on Hollywood. But that's so much changing. If you look at the latest Marvel series, Moon Knight, that's got a Egyptian, like a heavy Egyptian production crew, and it's also got a heavy Egyptian aesthetic to it. And I think things with Netflix nowadays, looking for international content, I find that the spread is really great. And South Africa, Netflix just wants content. And I think all the streaming platforms do. And there's this, I think Black Panther really helped in internationalizing, like realizing, oh, there are also other voices that need to be heard. So it's interesting, your point about feeling that you have to be to LA to make it is definitely, I feel, changed in a way. And I'm not based in LA yet. I do love LA. Look, I want to be in Hollywood. It's a fantastic place. Personally, I like it. I know some people hate it, but I love it there. And so that's kind of my end destination, just because there's people that are passionate about story, and there's people who meet at coffee shops discussing scripts, and that's what I love doing. So that's probably my end destination, but it doesn't have to be. And actually, two people that I know who are like really, one's a producer, one's a filmmaker in LA. They've moved out of LA since the pandemic, and they're now living elsewhere. and still working in the industry. So I think that barrier to entry has definitely been lowered, thank goodness. I don't know if we have to be there anymore. Maybe it'll change in the next couple of years once, well, COVID never seems to be dying down, but once things get back to normal, if what is normal, I don't know. But yeah, that barrier to entry is gone. And I think it is inspiring to know that you can come from a small place in the tip of Africa and still have a lot of credits to your name and still have a lot of experience in the industry. I think the most is just keep writing, you know.
In the book, you talk about the three wells that give writers their ideas. You talk about imagination, memory, and external sources. Basically, where did this idea for the three wells come from?
Sure, so a great question. I was actually on a meditation retreat, like a 10-day Vipassana retreat, and I'd been thinking about writing and creating for a long time, and I've been teaching it a lot, teaching screenwriting for over 20 years. And one of the things I find really difficult to teach is how to write authentic characters, authentic locations, authentic relationships within your story, how to write that stuff that comes from the gut, as opposed to a lot of early writers will copy, or even I did in my first script. It's like a memory of some other movie I've seen. And what came to me was I kind of slowed down that moment of creation when we're actually facing the flashing cursor. And we have to make decisions on where we set our movies, where we set our scenes, who the characters are. And I found out in this sort of meditation, I kind of slowed things down, and I slowed that moment of creativity down. And I discovered three distinct sources. The first is the external source as well, as you mentioned, which is other movies you've seen, other books you've read, anything else that's not your own creation, that somebody else has created. I feel that I can tap into that when I'm creating. And then the second one is imagination. So I can kind of make something up. Feels like it's a divine lightning bolt from above. And it's just like, let's write that. And we write that. And then the third one was the memory well, which is deep memories that I've experienced myself in life. So I've been there, and my five senses are activated, and I've actually been in that space. It's a little bit of an acting thing. You know, actors often, when they perform, they draw from their own memories as human beings in the world to then infuse their characters with that emotion. And what I found was that if I'm aware of these different sources, I can actually stop myself almost from mimicking or imitating, unless I want to mimic and imitate, and get myself in an emotional state so that when I'm creating from a space of authenticity. And in the book, I talk about resonance, and how when we write and we're like, for lack of a better word, like vibrating in a certain frequency, sometimes that enters the words on the page, and then that eventually is on the screen, and then that moves people. So that's kind of where the three wells came from. It was an attempt at helping people tell authentic stories that are within them. And by the way, this doesn't mean like writing your own life story. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm writing more, even, you know, in a Marvel movie, if you want to set something in an alleyway somewhere, and there's a fight in an alleyway, instead of imagining what an alleyway looks like, think of an alleyway near your house, and you're like, okay, and there's this graffiti on the wall, and there's this weird graffiti. Let me put that in the movie. And what you'll find is that there's some sort of resonance from your own memories that end up even in scenes that are not remotely linked to your life. You can still get that thing, and it's language fails me when I talk about creativity and this kind of a thing, but it's that like je ne sais quoi, that I don't know what, you know it when you see it. You're reading a script and it's like leaps off the page. It's like how to get that into your work. I find that thinking of the three wells and digging the wells deeper, and certainly loosening our access to certain things, so access to our memories and being less afraid of putting that on the page, or our access to imagination. And there's exercises in the book. There's like about 29 exercises you can do to kind of open up some of these channels. Now, when you're writing, if you're in the flow, you're not consciously thinking about these wells, but we do all draw from them. And there's some exercises you can do to feel what it feels like to access these different wells. So yeah, those are the three wells of screenwriting. They pretty much apply to everything, any form of creativity, writing, photography, anything. But because my field of speciality is screenwriting, I focused the book on the three wells of screenwriting. But it's quite possible that the three wells of creativity can be applied to kind of almost anything you're doing in the creative field.
You also, I know you talked about both in the book and here, about how the three wells can serve as a source for inspiration and ideas. How would you apply the three wells to the actual kind of meat of the writing process: characterization, story structure, dialogue, plot, conflict, things like that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Alrighty. So another great question. It's interesting. So I can give you some examples. For example, with character, if you want to create a character and you can, for example, think of Rocky, which is an external source as well, character, and then you could go into your own life and your memory well and think, okay, now who can I combine Rocky with to create a new character? Well, in my own life, I've got this really crazy uncle who's a drug addict, and if he combined with Rocky, that'll be an interesting character. And so you can kind of use it that way, and that kind of like combination activates your imagination, and then you can kind of create these unique characters. You can also, once you've rewritten your whole script, is actually use your memories and go back and look at characters in your scripts, even minor characters, and then think of your own life and think, wait a minute, there's this, it's just this kind of slowing down of the creative process. You go, oh, there's this cashier, this guy who works at the coffee shop. He's got this like big beard and he's kind of like a big bear of a man. If I use that description in my random character in my script who's got one line, suddenly he leaps off the page because he's got more authenticity to him. And what you'll find is that a lot of your characters will suddenly spark if you take elements from your own life and put it in. So that's using the kind of memory wells to create characters. There's other things in terms of looking for the theme that you want to write about in your story. You can also use your memories of movies that you've seen that you love, and there's an exercise in the book where there's like a list of sort of 10 movies that you love, and then you can kind of find the theme that you want to write about that. And in terms of dialogue, one of the most difficult things for me to teach is authentic dialogue, writing dialogue that's not street dialogue, so not dialogue that you hear on the street, not play dialogue, so not like verbose dialogue, but the combination of both, which is what screenplay dialogue is like. It's like a combination of information that you need to convey as a writer, but also real characters being in the real world. And I find very often, if we have to write a scene, for example, like a breakup scene, we end up often as writers, we know that we have to write in the scene, we have to communicate that they're breaking up. So, the character walks in and says, I'm breaking up with you. Whereas in real world, you break up with someone without even saying you're breaking up with them, because you just go like, I'm just not feeling great anymore in my life. And it could be this, that's like a dialogue. That's like, not saying I'm breaking up with you, but if you kind of use the memory well to go back into your own life and think about moments where you've kind of broken up with someone and just remind yourself that that's the way people are in the world, that can be quite powerful. So that's one way of writing dialogue using the three wells. But like I say, it's consciously breaking down the three wells when you're writing is not really the point. The point of the book is to dig those wells deeper so that it becomes automatic. However, if you've written a script that is maybe people are saying is, well, it's like everything I've seen before, which people want. They want the same but different, but they're saying it's like everything I've seen before. You may want to draw from the memory well to make it more authentic in some way. So that's, those are some examples of how those wells can be used when writing to infuse your script with something that's more you and more authentic and more your voice. And in terms of character relationships as well, it's about the complexity of the way that we relate to one another. That is something that we experience in life that is sometimes missing when we write scripts, because we end up writing scripts that are like, okay, who's your antagonist? Okay, that's the bad guy. Who's your protagonist? And that's the good guy. And we know in life that's not the way it works, right? Obviously, it's more complicated. So in terms of the interrelationships of characters as well, I think if we just consciously remember our own lives and our own experiences, we can get kind of really interesting, complex, multi-layered characters, because that's what's in life. So that's also the way you can kind of draw from your own life. And as you can probably tell, I'm leaning very much towards the memory well in this. Like the other wells are important, the external sources well. If you've written a movie that's just about your own life and is boring for people, you may want to say, well, how does this relate to other movies that I've seen? And can I make it more accessible to other people? So that's one thing you can do. But out of these three wells, I find it hardest to tap into the memory well because it's about putting yourself on the stage. It's like, Hemingway said, it's easy to write. You just sit at a typewriter and bleed. And that's the difficult bit, is the putting yourself out there. But I do tend towards the memory well as a source of real authenticity. So yeah, I hope that explains some of it. Yeah.
And I also noticed that you also noticed in the book that you had Christopher Vogler write the foreword. You may have noticed I also interviewed Chris, and great
Oh,
guy.
cool.
Writer's Journey is a wonderful book. Um, Now, I know you talked about how some writers approach, oh, I need the antagonist, so I need the protagonist, and I need this conflict, and I need them to get here by this point, here by this point, here by this point. That obviously that a lot of people incorporate that whole hero's journey structure into their writing.
Yes.
And whereas the Three Wells reads as more sources of inspiration and sources of ideas, how would you connect the Three Wells to the hero's journey structure?
Yeah. Again, another great question. What you've picked up on is in my book, I avoid structure completely. And I think at some point, I at the back of the book, I've got some like links to like, these are good books on structure if you want to see them, because it's been written so many books on structure. The Three Wells, one of the examples I use in the book is, when I was in Amsterdam and I sat in front of this painting by Van Gogh called Wheatfield with Crows. It's one of the second last painting he painted before he shot himself. It's a very moving painting, and it moved me emotionally. And one of the things I thought of when I was looking at this painting was it's moving me so much. And I know Van Gogh is an expert in art technique as well, but it never at some point did he kind of show the painting to a studio audience and say, like, a test audience, and say, do you think there should be more crows or less crows, or do you think there should be more yellow, or so he didn't kind of put on his analytical hat in that way. It wasn't kind of like after the fact, which is a lot of the story structure stuff I find can limit the moment of creation, because you're thinking so much about, have I got something on page 15 yet? The Three Wells focuses on that instant of creativity, that moment of creativity, which is got nothing to do with structure. It's got to do with just kind of call it the vomit draft. It just comes out fresh, and that's what it is. So the Three Wells avoid structure totally. It's not even a structure book in any way. There are really great things about structure. I think that we're in a really interesting point right now where TV series is really challenging the streaming television series is challenging the structures we've had in the past. There's no more ad breaks. There's no more set length to an episode. It can be however you want it to be. I think that the duration of an entire series has more time for character studies that are slower. And I feel that the structure that we've used in the past. Now, Chris is really clever in the hero's journey in that he says you don't have to have all these beats, and they don't have to be in this order, but it helps you to create some sort of an up and a down in your story, right? For me, one of the best things about structure, it may not be in the book, but my favorite quote about structure is from Alexander McKendrick's book on directing, I think it's called, on filmmaking. And he says, what's happening now shouldn't be as interesting as what may or may not happen later. So simple structure. Whatever is happening now in your story is not as interesting as what may or may not happen later. So you've set something up, something's going to happen. Someone's going to go to prom. Awesome, we watch the movie until they get to the prom. Or I've hidden something from my wife. Oh, she's going to find out, right? So there's this very simple structure for me. It's almost like an internal generator, like a donkey with a carrot in front of it, right? The carrot is what's going to happen later in your script. You tell your audience, something's going to happen later, and then they watch until that thing happens, and you just keep making more things happen. It's the simplest structure. I just love that one because it's really simple. It's not even a structure, it's more like a trick, but sometimes that works better. And just the last thing on structure is that I think I mentioned this in the book, about how people had been telling stories for so long until Aristotle wrote the Poetics, where he started analyzing structure. It's kind of like each story has its own structure. And I do believe that as human beings, we have an innate ability to kind of tell a story and put it out there. Once we get our analytical brains on to look at the structure, I don't know. It's sometimes, the more I teach this, the more I realize that thing about nobody knows anything. And there's another great quote, which I think is in the book, about there's 3 rules of writing a novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. It's one of my favorite ones. And so structure can be limiting. However, there has to be a reason to keep turning the pages. That's like so vital. And a lot of these structure theories will help you create that. So I'm not dismissing structure. It's really, really important. And look, I wrote sitcom for many years, which was literally 3-act structure. The advert breaks. Sometimes you have to do it. depending on what medium you're writing for. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
You also talked about how, like you said, the streaming services have really opened up ideas in terms of structure and ideas in terms of inspiration. Now this wonderful book, as wonderful as it is, it came out in 2018, which is pretty much a lot before a lot of the big streamers came into prevalence.
Yeah.
And and another thing that kind of occurred right after this book came out, as you mentioned, was the pandemic. Now, how do you think the pandemic has affected this kind of Three Wells approach? Now, I know you said the memory is the hardest to access, or the most difficult, maybe the most difficult in the book. You said it's most difficult emotionally to access. And like, say, during the pandemic, with everybody locked down, all they really had was external sources, whatever they would be able to watch on TV or on streaming or what have you. Now, since you wrote this book, do you see one of those walls kind of taking precedence for writers?
That is such a great question. That's one of the best questions I've ever had. You really got me thinking. And I think you might be onto something here. So in the last chapter of the book, I talk about live your life. And I talk about getting out there into the world and experiencing things and filling your memory well with memories that we can then draw from. And there's this Thoreau quote about how vain it is to sit down and write when you haven't stood up to live. And I like that one about getting out there and living and walking in the world and taking a different route to work and experiencing the world with all your senses and filling your memory well. And your point is great, is that in lockdown, we spent like a year, well, I did, locked down, not being able to go anywhere. And so we have definitely limited our out there experiences. And I actually think that that's such a great point. I think that the repercussions of lockdown are only going to be felt later on. And what is interesting for me is the Marvel movies prevalence right now. And I'm not just saying, because even me, I've just binge watched Hawkeye or something, right? Part of the appeal, maybe to some extent, of these Marvel and Star Wars and the Disney Plus things is that it's very much imagination well stuff. And yet the actors and the performers bring in the emotion, they bring in and for sure the writers put in some of their own. That's what makes it work, right? But it's interesting that you say that, because I'm just looking at the landscape of streaming services now and the things that really get the funding and get the money and get the development. In some ways, I wonder if being locked down has made us draw more from our imagination wells and our external sources wells and less from the memory well, because writing about the pandemic and writing about those experiences I haven't seen it that much. It may come through thematically in some work, but that's a really great question. Yeah, in some ways, our memories, even though they've been shared, because that's the other cool thing, is the pandemic has been shared across the globe. So we actually have shared memories now as like, human beings. We all know what it's like to wear masks, and we all know what it's like to be kind of locked down. Even though we've had that big shared memory experience, we actually have almost forgotten some things about interacting and speaking to others. And that's a really interesting question. I'm going to mull on that a bit more, but I think you're really onto something here. And it's just making me question all the stuff that's come out now on the streamers. And yeah, that's a really interesting question. What's happened to our memory well during the pandemic? Such a great question. I don't really have an answer to it, except you really got me thinking.
Maybe it'll be a good follow-up for the second edition.
Absolutely. Well, I'm thinking there's definitely going to have to be a second edition or a Three Wells of Creativity coming up soon.
And of course, writing the screenplay is only half the battle. I mean, the writer still needs to get the script in the hands of readers and agents and contest judges and managers and producers, and people can actually turn it into something on the screen.
Yep.
How do you think the Three Wells can help with that process?
So again, great question. I did some reading some time ago for a British Screen when I was in the UK. So that was it's a production company, I suppose, not a production. It's a funding body in the UK, and I've also done lots of script reading in South Africa. And The only thing I can say is that the words on the page are all that matter, and making your script stand out to somebody else is all that matters. And I really believe that, and Charlie Kaufman talks about this in a great lecture he gave at the AFI. If you haven't seen it, just Google Charlie Kaufman lecture AFI and watch that thing. It's fantastic. He talks about what do you have to give as a writer? Like, what's the thing that you're putting out there? And part of the memory well writing, again, and the three wells, but particularly the memory well, is if you put even the thing that you're most ashamed of, your loneliness, your sadness, your addictions, your complexities into the page in some way, it's going to leap off when a reader reads it. And you're going to have that thing Chris Vogler talks about he hasn't spoken about it in this book, I don't think, but it's something that I know he's working on, is like all your chakras are just vibrating at once. It's like everything's alive when you're reading something. Now, in order to get that as a writer, I do think that the three wells can help in making you attune to those vibrations of your own that you can then put on the page, and will make a script reader, agent, anyone who reads your script feel it in the first 10 pages. If you can do that, and people always talk about the first 10 pages, it's vitally important, even in the first page or 5, if you can, to show something that is different, authentic, or real to the reader. Then I believe you'll be able to pull in those agents and pull in those even script competitions. You'll be able to get further in them if you do that. And it's a big challenge, because it's like, putting yourself out there. It's the most difficult thing. I don't even know if I do it in my own work as much as I'd like to. So it's a difficult thing, but that's what the book challenges people to do, I think, is to put that authenticity out there, and that'll help you then go further forward. But it comes back to that moment of creation. Are we going to create bravely, or are we going to create because we just want to create content? And I think that's what the book challenges people to do, is to create something that's fresh and unique. And that may then get you an agent and get further. And actually, as a matter of fact, if we write from that perspective, if you're in this business to make money, that's fine, and you may end up doing it. But so many people are sold on this dream of like, oh, I'm going to be the next Tarantino or the next whatever. And so many people, even in my position, script gurus are like, what, we're making money out of people's dreams. And to be honest, Chris Vogel also talks about how you just get plucked from above, and he doesn't know how it happens. Sometimes magically you get plucked from above, and the next thing you know, you're directing the next, series or whatever. However, I do believe that some people are called to write for a reason that's more transformative and deeper for their own lives and their own growth as a human being. And if you draw from the three wells, particularly from the memory well, and write from that transformation that happens to you as a writer will be stronger. And so you'll grow as a human being. Never mind if you make it with your agents or not, because it's bigger than that. The actual whole process of writing is a bigger and more complicated thing.
And one last question, and for, like you said, for writers who are on that journey, for writers who are looking for mentors to guide them through the writing process, help them tap their three wells, help them learn more about structure and characterization and the nuts and bolts of screenwriting, what advice would you give them on what to look for in a consultant or teacher or coach?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because there's so many people out there offering advice and offering services for dollars, and it's difficult to know if someone's authentic or not. And yeah, I think one of the things for me is don't be afraid to go for broke. Like if you want to get Chris Vogler to be your script, give you feedback on your script, write him an email. His email's out there in his book. And that's how I ended up meeting Chris. It was just kind of a weird coincidence in a story expo, and we connected. And the next thing I knew, he's writing the foreword to my book. So I would say, don't be afraid of aiming high. My first job I ever got, I was watching a sitcom on the show on the TV in South Africa. I saw someone's name as the producer. I phoned the production company the next day. I said, can I speak to the producer? And they put me through to them. And the next thing I knew, I was writing sample scripts. And the next thing I knew, I was writing episodes for them. So aim high is, I suppose, what I'd say. Don't be afraid to aim high in terms of getting feedback. Really, you could be in the middle of nowhere. The barriers are very often the barriers are more in our minds than actually real barriers.
I want to say just thank you for that. You've done. I want to thank you for this great advice, and I just want to say it's been really an honor to talk to you today. And I hope everyone runs out and gets 3 Wells of Screenwriting. And I want to say thank you so much. And
thank you, Gerald.